Good evening. My name is Reverend Dr. Claude Ellis Forehand II. I'm the interim director or is interim executive director of the Reimagining America Project, or RAP. On behalf of Reverend Dr. Rodney Sadler and also the Honorable former Mayor Jennifer Roberts, as well as the commissioners and also the committee members of the Reimagining America Project, we want to welcome you for tonight's event. Solutions in education, what race has to do with it. The Reimagining America Project is really a group of passionate people who have come together to address the real root of racism, which is at its systemic level. All of the systems in which we live under are unfortunately corrupted by this same reality, whether it's healthcare, voting rights, criminal justice. Tonight, we're dealing with education. And we are going to take a peek at the education system and perhaps maybe reimagine together better solutions that can provide a more equitable outcome for all, regardless of race. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Joanne, who is going to share with us and going to lead us into tonight's webinar. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Claude. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I am Joanne Jenkins, and it is indeed a pleasure and a privilege to welcome all of you to tonight's presentation, Seeking Solutions in Education. What's race got to do with it? Well, race has everything to do with the state of things in public education in our nation, our state, and in our cities. Our committee's mission is simple: to shed light on the impact of systemic racism throughout the educational industry in our nation. But however, our work is very complex and very hard. The right to education has always been a tool to ensure that the haves never have to interact with the have-nots. And then you add racism to that formula. And we know here in our nation, racism has a 528-year head start on us trying to reimagine America. We are standing on the shoulders of those who have been fighting this reality for generations. Our presentation tonight is on community schools, and we are honored to have as our presenter Shemaya Haynes, an activist in our community. This evening, following the presentation on community and schools, there will be a conversation among other members of our education committee. And then we will have a closing leading into an invitation to you for our next event as a follow-up. Shemaya left the private sector after 35 years to work directly in the community. She is currently a guest lecturer at UNC Charlotte and the co-director for QC Family Tree, where she co-manages the organization with a focus on community organizing in Enderley Park neighborhood and beyond. And probably most importantly to her, I believe strongly economic status or race to identify and collectively solve problems. It's indeed a pleasure to now present to you Shemaya Haynes. Thank you.
You're muted, Shemaya.
Thank you so much. I am incredibly grateful to be here tonight to share with the community about the community schools model. It's something that I've been very passionate about, along with the Charlotte Community Think Tank. And we are just so thrilled that we're able to shed light on a positive solution that promotes equity and that I believe will change the educational trajectory of our children. So the title page is Community Learning Centers, and that's actually intentional. The intent behind that is as schools take on this model as a framework, we will call these schools community learning centers. And the reason why that's so important, you'll see a little later on in the presentation, the naming of it in and of itself, but we wanted the community to remember that these schools are a place of learning throughout, although other activities can take place. Next slide, please. So it's important for me to let you know that the community schools model has two strong partners involved: communities in schools and also the Charlotte Community Think Tank. Next slide. Next slide, please. So our strategy is that we're going to eventually have a pilot here in the Charlotte Mecklenburg school system. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide. I'm not going to go deeply into this one. What I'd like to do is I'm going to start this presentation with an impactful video. This video gives you an idea about what the community school model is about. And also it can tell you what it would take me 30 minutes to tell you in just 6 minutes. Go ahead with the video.
In Cincinnati, the community learning centers are unique in their commitment and deep foundation in the community engagement and community governance as well. Every single school has had a school-based governing body that is comprised of parents, community members, teachers, and administrators, each of them chosen by their own constituency group. And ultimately, the engagement of hundreds of people in the community pours into that local school decision-making committee.
I am the PTO president over at Roberts, so I deal with all of the parent issues. I also sit on the LSDMC, which is the local decision-making committee board as well for the school. I've had 5 kids go through Roberts. I have 7 total. What I generally do is I'm over there every other Tuesday at the school. We have our PTO meeting, which is our parent-teacher organization. I recently met with the superintendent for the Cincinnati Public Schools, along with PTO presidents and vice presidents from each school. Just bringing the PTO to the forefront for those parents to be able to come to us for any issues, because if somebody don't advocate for the parents and the kids, who will?
Oh, you've already found some toys to play. All right. So with this activity, everybody can go ahead with their children and pour the sand into your buckets here. There's different ways we can use questioning techniques, and there are 2 different types of questions we're going to talk about today.
Learning Together was born, and the parents said, we want something to do with our children. And so we brought this model in, and it's really about, our work is focused on the family and how we support the families as the child's first teacher, because that's where they're spending all their time, is at home. And so when they're at home with their children, these are things they can do with things within their home to help support children in their learning.
En el caso de Jonathan, por ejemplo, le estaba poniendo la mano y tratando de agarrar la arena, ¿verdad? Y como que se sintió funny y sacó la mano. So empezó a tirar por allá, ¿verdad?
My name is Bill Burwinkle, and I'm a born and raised Cincinnatian. And I was born in Loveland, Ohio, and that's on the east side of Cincinnati. And unlike most people, I came west. And after I came out of the service, I ended up living in Price Hill. And I've been in Price Hill for 45 years now. I started my business in my basement, and that was up in East Price Hill, not more than a half mile as a crow flies, up on top of the hill. And as my company grew, I needed more space, and I decided that I wanted to make a commitment back to the community where I got my start at. I'm now chairman of the board, so I only stop in for visits. I pick up the bank deposits, the most important thing to do, and I go to the bank, and my office is now upstairs behind the lunchroom. Let's just talk about Euler School and getting involved there, because as the principal asked me to get involved, I did commit some of my own time. The school has a thing called an LSDMC, Local School Decision Making Committee. And what that committee does, because I asked, well, what do we do? Is this some rubber stamp thing? Or are we actually going to do something? And they said, well, you're responsible for making sure the school delivers to the community what the community wants. So I went to a community council and asked what they wanted. They said, we want our high school back. A little background, Euler used to be a pre-K through 12th grade high school. It was one of the first industrial high schools in the whole state of Ohio. It had woodworking, it had metal shop, it had home ec, it had all those things. When I came to Euler, half the building was vacant. It was pre-K through 8th grade. So back to the community council meeting, I said, well, that shouldn't be difficult. They said, we've been asking forever. It's never going to happen. It took us over a year, and we had to go in front of the school board, make presentations. We had to go out in the community and do surveys and count kids on how many kids would come to high school. And the last vote of the year, it got passed.
That group is responsible on an ongoing basis, first of all, for confirming the vision that has come out of these planning processes, for identifying the priorities that we need to be able to achieve the vision, and then also selecting who will the partner be.
So that video gives you just a snippet of how a community school model might be instituted in a community. And it's important to note that here in Charlotte-Mecklenburg schools, we actually do already have a school leadership team. So it's not impossible for us to execute this model and to do a fine job of it. We just have to have some wherewithal in our community. Before I get into what a community school model is, I want to just kind of share with you what a community school is not, so that as we get into the presentation, we kind of level set and help to understand, kind of what the differences are in some other models and projects that we've had over the years in CMS. First of all, this model is not the Comer Development Program model. Although Comer model is extreme, had seen some successes, this is not it. And the biggest difference between the Comer model and the community schools model is that although the Comer model calls for strong advisory to the school leadership, it doesn't actually have the amount of decision-making and capacity building in terms of the outside community and also with parents. Renaissance West currently has a strong model called the purpose-built model. That model actually does a lot in terms of things like curriculum and discipline and those kinds of things, but it really doesn't address bringing the community in the way that the community schools model seeks to do. There are numerous things that differ from the community schools model, but the purpose-built model is one that is a highly robust research-based model, and that's what's used at Renaissance West. Communities in schools. This is the one that I really want to touch on. Communities in schools, since this presentation was made, is actually a partner in bringing the community schools model to CMS. Communities in Schools is an organization that has that has a caseload in a school. They have, and they do a tremendous amount of wraparound services, and they do a great job for the students that they have on their caseload. We kind of look at the community schools model as communities in schools on steroids, because now you have a school that's addressing outside community needs along with the entire school population, the entire body. And so we're excited for that partnership with communities in schools, and I'll answer any questions people have about that later. Project Lift. Project Lift focused a great deal on improving teachers and leaders in the schools, and they did have some community partnerships and some wraparound services. However, it just didn't have the major components of the community schools model. And you'll see that in the next slide. Beacon Schools, kind of the same thing with as the Comer model, where there's strong support for parent advisories and community advisory, but there really isn't that really deep ownership and engagement and involvement that's present at a community school, in the community school model. I also want to say this, and that is, this model should not be seen as a substitute for adequate funding for public schools. It should be considered a safety net due to political shifts that have an adverse effect on families. We know that the right thing to do is to fully fund Leandro. No one is saying do not fund Leandro. That's not, we fight to get Leandro funded. We're trying our best to stave off the charter movement, for-profit charter schools in Title I school areas in particular. And we're trying to make sure that the voucher program doesn't supersede the public schools. All of those things are still the same, and the same in that what we're trying to do here is, we know that there are some political shifts that seek to end public education, and this model is really seen as our competitive advantage. It seeks to deal with things that currently we don't have an answer for. So I'm not going to get on a tangent. I'm going to go to the next slide. So the community schools model operates on 6 pillars, and these 6 pillars drive the success of the model. It's important to know that the community schools model is an evidence-based model. That means that it has been around for enough time, research has been done, and there is evidence that this model, if executed with full fidelity, we will see some academic successes. There's another thing to note here, and that is that there are no quick fixes in education. This actually will change our school system from a foundation perspective and a culture perspective. And those are harder things to do, but it's necessary so that we have our competitive edge to preserve our public schools. It calls for rigorous aligned curriculum. It calls for a focus on high quality teaching, inclusive models of school leadership, positive discipline practices such as restorative justice, authentic parent and community engagement, and wraparound supports for students, parents, and the community that feed into our schools. Next slide, please. Now, I want to talk about the guiding principles. I'm not going to go into deep conversation about this, because I know that there are going to be questions at the end, and I want to give everybody a chance to ask their questions and also create some conversation around these principles and other things. But the principles actually guide the community schools, the approach to the school transformation, provide a framework that undergirds each community school's implementation standards. In other words, we know that this is an equity-based model. Why is it an equity-based model? Well, the idea is that a school is the center of its community. It's one of the top assets in a community. And so why not take the school, and for those things that we don't currently have in our community, such as GED classes, immigration clinics, and legal help, and healthcare centers, and dental clinics, and all the things, and adding good nutrition into schools, or better nutrition, all of the things that influence a child's education, but we may not currently have within our community. We bring those things closer to reach for the community. We invest in a whole child approach to education. Again, we're not just thinking about books, pens, and pencils. We're thinking about if children come to school and they have cavities and their teeth hurt, then that may impede their learning. So we're looking at all of those things. A child coming into school where parents may be less educated, perhaps they don't have a high school diploma or a GED, they can pursue those things. We want to build on community strengths and ensure conditions. We want to take an asset-based approach. We want to look at what the community strengths are and bring those into the school culture and environment. We want to use data and community wisdom to guide partnerships and programs and progress. And the reason it's important for us to think about both the data and what it suggests, we also need to look at the wisdom of the community. What is the history of this community? What can we do as a community to support our children? And are we asking the question about what we all can bring to the school and also allowing that to happen? Next slide, please. We want to commit to interdependence and shared accountability. We want to make sure that we all look at ourselves as, if not educators, but investors in education, whether it's volunteering, whether it's making a donation, whether it's hosting a free workshop, class, bringing a program to the school, all of those things. Along with that comes a set of accountabilities. Are our children learning? Are they getting to where they need to be? And you do that by strong ownership into a school, a project, a program, whatever it is. We want to invest in building trusting relationships. Let's face it, y'all, we need to build trust within our public school system. Parents have to know that when they take their children to school each day, that that child is learning, that if a problem arises, that the school is in partnership with us, that if something is happening in the community, that we're addressing those things. We're building trust, and we're taking care of each other, all under the guise of improvement education for children. And last but certainly not least, we are fostering a learning environment. With all the things said, we can provide as many social services as we want, as much wraparound services as we want, as many prayers as we want. But at the end of the day, the school building is a place for learning. And everything that we do and everything that I've just said, it should be leading to academic success for children, academic excellence for children, and a place of learning, i.e., the community learning centers. Next slide. So this is a community toolbox, and it was actually taken from Texas City School, somewhere in Texas. And at that point, actually was Austin. So Austin was trying to save its public schools. And again, we in the community schools model world, we consider this model as our competitive advantage. So what needs to happen? You have to have strong conditions for learning, that there are instructional programs, that there are instructional programs with high rigor, strong expectations. Students are motivated and engaged in learning. There's basic physical, mental, and emotional health needs that are being addressed, that we have mutual respect and effective collaboration among families, parents, schools, and staff. And community engagement is taking place, that we together work on the solution to a problem that maybe we didn't cause, but our children are being affected by it. So you may be thinking, okay, Shemaye, this sounds great, you and the community schools model people, but what does it actually take to implement a community school? Well, there's quite a bit of things that have to take place, but one of the things that's key is that there is a community school coordinator. And that person, when you heard Mr. Burwinkle on the video, he said, they asked him what his job was, or he asked what they wanted him to do. And they said, well, listen to the community, and whatever they want, make sure that it gets, that the word gets out or it gets heard. Well, that's what he was taught. And so this person who's in the school, that person's responsibility is to make sure that the things the community is asking for, desiring, actually gets executed in the school. That there's shared leadership. That is very important. We have what's called a school leadership team in CMS. Oftentimes, though, it's not fully executed to benefit the entire school for a variety of reasons at this point. It's not a finger pointing thing here, but what I want to say is we actually have the framework for doing exactly what the community schools model calls for. When a community school is when a community learning center is executed, we just want to make sure that the school leadership teams are also executed to their fullest fidelity according to the policies that we already have. It says, how long does it take to plan a community school? Well, you might be surprised, 6 to 9 months. It's a quick turnaround. We will see that here in Charlotte. I'll give you a little more brief details about that in a minute. And then there are coordinated resources. Technically speaking, the school system should pay very little for a community school model. The reason being is that we're utilizing resources that we already have in the community, and typically another stakeholder will come and provide the salary for the community schools coordinator. So in other words, we're getting a lot of bang for our buck in the community when we start a community school model or a community learning center. Next slide. Okay, so in the beginning, you saw a slide where we talked about a strategy. And that strategy has to do with the fact that we are currently able to explore this model in 2 CMS schools. And what that exploration looks like is, it's not quite a pilot yet, but we're simply going to explore with the community as to whether they would be receptive to this model or not. And if so, what does it look like? If not, what were the barriers to, what were the barriers for the community? What were their questions around that? When I speak about community in the sense of a community school, what I'm speaking of is not Deb Blackwood, who's in a whole nother side of town, or Shemaye Haynes that's in a whole nother town. I'm speaking specifically to that community there near the school, people who feed into the school and have a direct stake in the school. So in our exploration strategy, we have identified our 2 schools already. We've launched a campaign to support the community schools model. And now we're in the phase of actually developing and devising a plan with our key stakeholders. Once that's done, we'll measure our results and we'll assess the feasibility to move forward, hopefully to have a pilot. And also, I want to say that our 2 funding sources were the Belk Foundation and then another grant got matched by the United Way. So I want to thank them for having the confidence in this model. Next slide, please. So here's the update to the slide. We have at this point in time, we've received adequate buy-in from CMS leadership. We did a long song and dance to get to the point where we were actually able to identify 2 schools. We were able to build consensus with the leader of the Northeast Learning Superintendent, that's Dr. Stephen Esposito. And we are so proud that he has been fully committed so far into this project. And our 2 schools identified are Hidden Valley and Martin Luther King Middle. Questions?
All right, folks. So just for you to understand, we've got some predetermined questions that we thought many of you would ask, but also we have the capability of writing your own questions in the Q&A. So please use the Q&A function, not the chat, if you have questions. All right, we'd like to start off with some of the predetermined questions that we had. And we've assigned those questions to individuals so that they can ask the question and Shemai will do her best to answer them. And I will say that all confidence in all truthfulness, we showed her the questions beforehand, so it's not like she's gonna never seen these questions before. So first question goes to Joanne Jenkins.
Actually, good evening. My name is Aisha Edwards. That's fine. It's okay. I'll pose the first question for the evening. In times of change, people tend to fall back on traditional solutions, also known as systemic racist comfort zone behaviors. Please speak to our audience about the hope for a better academic future that the community school model will bring to our community when it is adopted into our current school system.
Yes. So history tells us, especially in North Carolina, that particularly the Black community, we've always struggled with our schools being adequately funded, adequately resourced, all of those things. We've always struggled with that. The difference a little bit that we have today is that we have to be able to have a space and a voice to be able to say, we know what it takes to take care of our children from a communal perspective. We may not be physical teachers in a school, we may not be a principal in a school, but we can identify what solutions need to be in place to support the school learning environment. Right now, we have an environment where there isn't a solid infrastructure to bring community members in the robust way that we want to do it for the community schools model. We have some infrastructure in place to support a community schools model, but we just got to have the wherewithal to really execute it and execute it well. I will say that yes, there is racism. And in fact, racism, the core of racism is denying people education, namely Black people who were formerly enslaved in this country. Our fight has always been to read and to write and to be valued members of society. And every time we face that challenge, we've always stepped up to the plate. Now what we have to do is we have to fight off the systemic nature of keeping parents out of the school, keeping community out of the school, and investing in things that really do support the community's needs. Because at the end of the day, you know, if we're loving on kids throughout the school day and trying to educate them, but we're sending them into impoverished homes, we're sending them into homes that are seeing the ramifications of oppression, then we're just going in a big circle. Why not have our schools address, without addressing racism particularly, we're addressing the problem of oppression, and we're taking that into our own hands and doing what we've always really done, and that is move forward for our children.
All right, thank you. Next question is something that you addressed, but maybe you'd like to restate that. During your presentation, you spoke about how this model, the community schools model, is different from some of the other alternative programs. Can you point out again some of the specifics of what the community school model offers that the other programs do not?
Okay, so yes, I love this question. This is the question of the evening. One of the things that the community has spoke of and has spoken out about time and time again, and we all kind of know that this is a looming issue, and that is that the schools have done some work in terms of bringing wraparound services into the school, social service providers, churches, and all the different things, okay? But really, where the rubber meets the road with the community schools model is that in other words, it's who's making the decision, number one, about what services are available and to what degree and by whom. The community decides that, and with a community school model. The other thing is we sort of have lost our way in terms of what we think of parent engagement. We've never made the transition from where parents were in poverty, but they had time because they had a guaranteed income. Now parents are in poverty, but they do not have time. They don't have time to spend with you having some boring program just because there's a federal mandate out there that tells you you have to do this 10-point slide presentation. What they want now is they want an opportunity to help themselves. They want to be able to come to the school and have something benefit them. A prime example of that could be there are parents who do not have a GED or who are not even literate. They're just functionally literate. I'm sorry, they're functionally illiterate. And if the school could provide them a pathway to get that GED, to make a few more dollars for upward mobility, if we could provide something for them to benefit them and to help them to raise their families, then that's the benefit of this model. And that's not currently what we have. What we have is a lot of caring educators and people struggling to find a solution, but at the same time, zero infrastructure or little to no infrastructure to support bringing parents in to support a healthy culture in the schools. I hope that answered the question.
Okay, so question 3, Shemai. With your experience in both the community school model and public school model, can you describe the difference in the school's culture, learning atmosphere?
Yes, so one of the things that is a common thread within the community schools model is how the culture of teaching changes. The culture of the school changes. This is important to know because even when I'm presenting on the community schools model, I talk an awful lot about the outer community, bringing people into the school environment, but it may not really be clear to people as to how that transitions and changes the environment within the learning day for kids. You know, if a teacher and or principal only has to worry about the things that directly affect education, such as books, pens, pencils, all of those direct things, then it frees them up to actually be able to teach their kids and put in interventions for children that are struggling and to actually be able to teach. If you talk to teachers, one of the frustrations that they have outside of large class sizes is that they don't have time to teach because so-and-so is hungry or something is taking place. They don't have time to make phone calls home because of all of the different things. If we as a community can come in and support that and take that off their plate, then they actually get the chance to educate. And the principal actually gets a chance to lead his folks, his or her folks. We don't have to spend time talking about who's hungry today or who needs health services, because those things are addressed.
Deb, you got the next question.
Wonderful. Tell us the 3 most important qualities that both the administrators and the staff of community schools must demonstrate to really carry out their duty to children and families in the programs.
I think that's these are some phenomenal questions, by the way. Well, Deb, to be honest with you, one of the things, let's talk about the school leader. A leader of a community school model has to really think very differently than we currently think today. They have to be willing to accept the fact that sometimes what a school thinks is a great thing may not necessarily be what the community thinks is a great thing. Example, there might be some loudmouth community leader out here that's always raising issues and raising a fuss about schools and everything like that, and really being a challenger in the process. With the community school model, as long as that community leader is accepted by the community and that person is able to lead people to a certain place from a community perspective, then whether you like him or not, or her or not, guess what? We're still in this together, and we have to work together to build consensus. You see, we don't generally have a problem with programs that provide a body in a school or shoes and socks or provide something. But it really becomes difficult when you have to face people who may not be of the same culture, who may not speak your same language, who may be, mildly aggressive and want to hold you accountable to some things. Well, the reality of it is you have to be accountable to people you may not really like because they live in that community. They're a part of that community. In terms of teachers, teachers really benefit the most from this model, I think. But they have to really be able to honestly say that if I have 35 kindergartners in my class, I can't adequately teach 35 kindergartners. I may actually need to call on the community to help me. I may actually, if I have students that have challenges and needs, then I have a resource, but I need to use it. I can't just have this situation and have this community want to help me, but I don't take that or accept that help. As far as SROs, behavioral technicians, those folks, we need to have a shift in terms of how we think about discipline in schools and how we can impact discipline to where it has a multiplier effect. Things like restorative justice practices. What I love about that is when it's in line with the community schools model, that's something that impacts community as well, because it actually seeks to bring that young person back into the community and have them come to support the community and build trust and be on the right side of things. We know that it's very, very, very important for the community, and most of all parents, have some sort of say and control in what their kids do. And sometimes we as a community have to come together to make all of that happen so that leaders can lead, teachers can teach, and behavior officers and people like that don't actually have a job to do. That we've addressed it to the point that things jumping off is very rare.
Okay, question number 5, and thank you for your passion for the family. Tell us how community schools measure their success in implementing culturally centered programs for families and sustaining long-term family engagement throughout the academic experience.
So a few things. Constant assessment is a key function for this model. And because it's been around for a long time, there are numerous of tools to help you to assess these things. Also, you know, this model, because of what it is and because of how it calls for such strong community support up front, buy-in, ownership, embedded in that is the culturally responsive piece, because it's the actual community that's executing on the priorities of the school and also helping the school to achieve the academic goals that it seeks to achieve. Right now, many of our schools, particularly in the Title I schools, we have people who come from all places within Charlotte. Typically, teachers are not teaching in the same communities that they're from. Leaders are not teaching from the same communities that they're from. There are all kinds of differences, race, culture, all of those things. But if the community itself is really driving the bus to inform them about culture and to inform them about what a solution looks like for that particular community, that's why we consider this an equity-based model, because it supports people right where they're at. And it really kind of demands that if you're in a culture, in a certain neighborhood with a certain culture or a certain group of cultures within people, that those cultures are represented in every facet of the school where it exists. The community schools model, that coordinator is called upon to do frequent assessments. That person also reports out the success of how well the community actually, how well we made good on the things the community asked us for. And that's important to note too, because the only thing that counts is what you count. If you don't count whether or not we said we wanted A, B, C, and D, but we didn't work towards A, B, C, and D, then, you know, it may not happen. So that's a great question. And thank you for answering. Ruby, did I answer that question for you?
You certainly did. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so let's talk about one of my biggest concerns, the school to prison pipeline. And we know that has been studied and proven to be the normative experience for Black, Brown, and Indigenous students in the USA. Tell us how the community school model of corrective discipline works to interrupt the racist cycle of despair for students.
A community school that is executed with full fidelity actually works with the community itself to address the concerns about discipline. Also within this model that I really didn't touch on much, but I think this is an important point here, is that because the community is heavily involved in the school, that leads to a great deal of transparency. If you think about it, if your child is not, you know, acting out or whatever, you know, their behavior is okay, you may not know that it was 50 fights that year in the school. You may not know who carried a gun or a knife or who made threats. With this model, there's a level of transparency there, number one, that informs parents and families about the status of the school. We don't have that currently in place, really. And what this does is it seeks to look at the community to come up with its own solutions. I'll go back to restorative justice practices. This model actually recommends that we try to get closer to that Many places say that they have restorative justice practices in place. Some people within CMS will say that they have restorative justice practices in place, but we also still have school resource officers, which I'm not saying get rid of those yet, or get rid of those until we get rid of some of the issues that we have. But the idea is to work our way through not having to have those things in place. So if a community in a community school model was to say, hey, we want to explore restorative justice practices in our school, then they have the leverage and the leeway, and resources are put in place to allow them to do that. That's a long, that's a foundational thing. It takes a while for, it to all come to full cycle, but it does address a serious problem. And, I think that people too, when they know people are watching, they become more sensitive. When they begin to explore the community and live and breathe in the community and really experience the community, and there's trust, they start to see a child as being a child, not a criminal in kindergarten because he acted out or she acted out. So this model is beneficial there, and there have been proven results that there's a decline in suspensions and that there are healthy alternatives.
Okay, number 7, please share with us the strategies that community schools use to support children without a strong supportive family system backing their education.
So that's the basis of the community schools model. We know that when parents are in deep poverty and deep oppression at the same time, that it affects their ability. Some ways it's a privilege to parent your child when you have a job and you're working 50 hours a week, or you're working a job that's 30 hours a week, but you're Ubering, another however many hours a week. And so what the community schools model really does is it seeks to help parents identify who their resources are in the community who can help them with those needs. If you think about it, our communities have changed a tremendous amount over even just the last decade. People don't know their neighbors. People sometimes, I'm a little more seasoned than some people who may be watching this webinar, but I can remember it was unheard of for children to be in daycare centers for 10, 12 hours a day. Somebody, you were with somebody else's family and they were part of your family till your mama got home or whatever. My mom watched other people's children, and we had that communal support that we no longer have today, because the reality is parents are still in poverty, but they don't have time anymore. So we have to be able to fill in the gaps with that. It could come in the form of latchkey programs, where you teach kids how to do latchkey and you teach them how to be organized and get their homework done and still care about their academics. It could be in the form of some after-school enrichment, which doesn't directly address academics, but it still supports a healthy academic culture. It could be a variety of things. And the one thing that I want to say is that I'm trying to be general enough in my answering questions, because if you execute a community school model correctly, the community itself defines what their idea of healthy discipline practices are, what their idea of a good school culture and environment. And that's really not for us to define, but we just know that when this model is executed, that we allow the community to uplift its voice to help those things. Samantha, oh no, Kevin.
I'm here, hold on. Am I unmuted? Yes, okay.
Yes.
Got to make sure that I'm trying to answer questions in the chat. There's a lot of pushback that seems to be addressed to the community school model, some by local leadership. Tell us how this resistance is navigated by the administrators, community partners, and allies when implementing this program.
So, you know, I'm not giving people strategy on the World Wide Web over here, okay? I have my ways. But what I will say about that is simply, we have, there are a few things. One is we do have the buy-in with CMS. We've actually met with the principals of both schools, and they are interested in engaging in this process. That right there gives us enough power and leverage to do what it is we need to do, because the reality of it is we've got one of the other issues in our community is that we have people who are in positions, but our marginalized people don't always have full representation. This process allows that voice to be heard and magnified. And once the community steps up and says, hey, this is what we want, and there's a solid plan, and there is a solid plan to bring this model to life, then that's the power and the value in it. I hate to be cliche, but the power is in the people, their wherewithal. If the community wants to uplift Hidden Valley School through this process, all hands on deck for that. And so that's what we got to really lean into. You have, a school board is only as powerful as the constituency that it serves. County commission, all of them, all of us. So we have to take hold of that and just really keep that in our minds that, yes, these are policymakers. Yes, we have some really strong opinions about what works and what doesn't work. But at the same time, the wherewithal of the people really stands clear here. And that's why this is an equity-based model. I also want to say that, I've heard all kinds of things from, we've tried this before. Well, no, we haven't. We just haven't. How is this any different than Lyft? Well, I addressed that earlier, but I will tell you that the one area where we have really, really, really had a lot of resistance was listening to the community and allowing the community to take ownership of the problem and take ownership of the solution. And that's really how we circumvent that. Did that answer your question, Kevin?
Yes, it did. I believe you gave a very strong answer. So I hope everybody that we can work with that answer, and again, get the community to contribute to a solution.
I think Joanne added part 2 to this. She talked about, she's asking about why some people are afraid of this model being implemented, some community school leaders.
Okay, so I don't want to get too far into the negativity about our school system, because right now I'm in a position where I'm asking for their partnership. So I don't want to slap them in the face and ask for partnership at the same time, but here we go. We are in nationwide, we are in a public school crisis. We have a fine mix for disaster. In terms of, we've got people, there are rich people, poor people, folks in between who just do not trust the public school system in Charlotte, Mecklenburg. Yet we have people who are struggling to try to fix it and to make it right. And we have people who are working in schools who get beat up constantly because they're not making the mark. And so what we have to look at here is what happens if you beat on a person 24/7, 365 days a year? Then eventually they either quit or they withdraw, right? So what we have is people who are afraid they're afraid of us seeing what we already know, which is they need more support. They need more help. And it's very hard to articulate this, how this doesn't make any sense, but this is what's happening. As a parent, this is how I got started in doing all this stuff. As a parent, two of my children went to a Project Lift Title I school. And as I was trying to improve things by saying, hey, I'll volunteer. Hey, I'll start a nonprofit. Hey, I'll do, hey, I'll do, hey, I'll do. Well, what that was looking like to the principal at that time was, you trying to take over. Who do you think you are? You trying to replace, this or that, or why are you doing this? And so what that did was it really forced me out of that school where my income, my skills, everything could have benefited that school. And so sometimes they make decisions based on the trauma they faced, okay? Because that's real. We talk about trauma with human beings and individuals and Black folks. People who work in the public school system have been under a tremendous amount of trauma.
Yes.
And rather than, the knee-jerk reaction is to reject things that may actually expose what we already know. Okay, we already know you got problems. So the thing that I want to uplift in this moment and in this conversation is that that's common in the workplace. If you're in a toxic work environment, people, they uphold that toxicity until something happens and they can see positive results. They can see where they're able to teach a class, they're able to have the community and the parents trust again, and that there's an open dialogue, and that when people call the principal's office or superintendent or whoever, that there's positivity there. When we start seeing positive results, people will come along, but we got to get to that point where we're able to explore it long enough to get to the results that we all want and that we all desire.
Okay. Can you compare the academic and social outcomes of community schools with the community school model with the magnet school model, which has been criticized by many as another tool in maintaining a segregated system?
Well, this one is a little bit of an easy question because there are some people out there who really feel like the magnet schools actually sought to do some of the same things that charter schools sought to do, which was to take the best and the brightest out of the community and transition them into other places in the community and all of that. What I will say is that the beauty in the community schools model is that, number one, we're trying to create instead of fighting about what funding we're not getting necessarily. I'm not saying we don't fight for Leandro. That's not what I mean. Let's get that clear, because people have tried to put that in there. What I'm saying is, instead of exerting our energy towards trying to beg and cajole the system out of what is clear that it's going to be a long haul for anything to change there, what we're essentially saying is we're going to meet people in the community where they're at. If they're in an impoverished neighborhood, so what? We're gonna put in our own defense mechanisms to ensure that these children learn, no matter what that looks like. There are some community schools around the country that have reported that they're getting their kids back from charter schools and back into the traditional public schools. And the reason why that is because sometimes I've heard people say, my number one customer within CMS is children. And if I'm not taking care of children, I'm not blah, blah, blah. Well, guess what? That might be true. But your number one customer is actually parents. Parents are making a decision to remove their children or leave their children in place. If you're disrespectful to parents, they don't feel heard, they're going to go where they get heard and where they feel like the likelihood of their child getting enriched is going to be. That can be the public school. This model supports that vision. This model supports bringing children back into the traditional public school and places where learning is happening and that we as a community can be proud of versus beating folks up all the time. Hope that answered the question.
Okay, final question. School administrators, and I used to be one, tend to believe that they have a bead on the pulse of their community and their schools. We tend to know our people. Tell us how community school model differs its method of community schooling and needs assessment than the traditional school practices.
Yep, I know exactly where you're coming from. I have had the privilege of working with over the last, 6-7 years that I've been involved in education, with working with so many retirees in education. I won't name their names because they don't claim me in public, but but here's the thing. I mean, that they are right. They do know their people. They know their people. But their people may not necessarily be the community that they serve. Yeah. They may have the pulse on who the community is from their insight as far as running that school. But the beauty in the community schools model is that this statement is very true. They do know their people. But what will happen is they get an enhanced version of what the community really is. It turns over the rocks of, the assets in the community. Some principals actually don't even know who the builders are in the community. They don't really know who the real leaders are. Some principals don't only look at what programs can come in and the data that supports those programs. They may not be looking at the fact like, okay, well, the community wants, the community is screaming up and down about Black history not being in the curriculum. Well, the truth of it is there's probably somebody in the community that will come in and do workshops 24/7 about Black history. Yeah. Did you ever know that was the case? So yes, they know their people currently, but with the community schools model, they get an enhanced version of what the community is. They get a new definition of what it is and what the needs are and what we want.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Shemai, for a very thorough discussion about the community school model. I also appreciate those that have hung in. We do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and I think that you are more than capable of being able to answer them. The first is, does the community school model make decisions on curriculum?
Yes and no. What happens is, for the things that our educators are responsible for, we as a community don't try to take over or bully the folks out of, understanding what that is. However, there is input and feedback that's taken from the community, and the community does ultimately have a say in it, but it's a collaborative, that piece of it is a collaborative effort between the community and also the school. It's a part of the 6 pillars, because what we look at is we say, okay, what makes a school great? What gives us our competitive advantage? That gives us our competitive advantage, but really the teaching staff and the school community, the inner school community is actually the driver of that bus. We don't try to take them over, but what we do try to do is collaborate with them. They educate us about the curriculum choices that they want to make, and we as a community say, we think that that'll be great for our kids, and then we measure the results. So sure.
All right, thank you. Another question, and this is very timely. considering where we stand in the country's attitude toward teaching in the community school model. What if the community raises the question of book banning, or is I'm going to address the needs of the cultural aspect of the community, say Latin culture or LGBTQ issues or something of that nature?
Yeah, so I think that this model has great value to address those things. From a community organizing perspective, I look at this, I look at things a couple ways. One is, you know, if my child is at a school that's in a primary, you know, just say primarily the Latino community, which Hidden Valley is 56% brown folks, okay? And so, you know, who actually gets more say into what is actually taught, who's driving that bus? And what we have to do as a school and as a community and as leaders is come to consensus around what's best. You know, we tend to think of things as, if you give this person something, then it's going to take away from someone else. It doesn't always have to be that way. And collaboration supports building bridges when these things come up. Now, in terms of book banning and those kinds of things, you know, individual communities come together and they decide what's best for their individual community. I know that book banning is on the horizon. I will never support book banning. If it ever comes to a neighborhood, a community, a county, I'm going to fight tooth and nail to not have that be part of our process. Yet at the same time, if parents in a community kind of say, hey, you know, we want to have these controls over what our children read or what they see or whatever, but we're not going to make that decision for you next door or for you across the street. It's still important for parents to have that say, but not make that determination for all children.
And if I could maybe just add on to that, it's not the loudest voice, it's the most voices.
Exactly.
And I think that's what we're seeing now is a lot of loud voices, but we are not necessarily addressing all of the voices that are there. And again, I'm a strong advocate for community schools. You hear that in my close. All right, I have one last question in the Q&A, and I think this is a great setup. When do we get started? What's the next step for the community school model? And how do we implement it?
Well, there are a few things. One is what we're hopeful for is that we do some robust exploration in the 2 schools that we've identified. That the community will really show up and show out in this exploration, that we plan to achieve some big wins even in the exploration of the model. And I'm not going to go all into that because we ain't got enough time on this program. But we explore the model, the community. We're hoping that the community will accept this model as they gain an understanding and see all the benefits that we talked about tonight. And then after that, there's a pilot that takes place where we actually execute the model to the fullest extent in more schools, that we receive more resources, that our partners who do that part of it can receive more resources to actually execute the model. But we'll have a footprint from Hidden Valley and Martin Luther King Middle, and that we can pursue this further. I mean, really, this really does depend on the wherewithal of the community itself. What I'd like to see is that policy get passed to where any community that wants their school to be a community learning center, that they have the ability to execute on that, so long as they go through the process, that they say they want it, that they put a coordinator in the school, and that we move forward. So the sky's the limit on what we can do as far as the community school model. We already have our go ahead to do this exploration, which I'm excited about. And I'm excited about all of the ownership that the community will have and the drive that we'll have for excellence.
All right, thank you. I don't see any new questions in the Q&A. Do any of the panelists have a question?
Yes, first of all, Shemai, thank you so much. This has been, simply put, amazing. Can you talk about your vision regarding better representation, balance of representation, specifically racial and ethnic representation for both student interfacing as well as experience and exposure for all stakeholders?
Oh man, that is a huge vision. Wait a minute, how much time do we have? So if you talk about vision, okay, not putting a time limit on it, if I had my pie in the sky, first of all, I do want to tell this audience that I am running for school board at large. I plan to be on the ballot in November. So therefore, I've thought a lot about this. And one of the things is that I want to see our communities really have a grave amount of ownership. If a person, no matter whether a person lives in a place they own, in a place they rent, even if they live in a car, the place where their kids go to school should be one that they can be proud of, brag about, and that those kids should be equipped to have a college career or entrepreneurial venture. My vision is that we actually structure some sort of internal teaching programs like we had when we were extremely desperate, and like we had when we were the ones who actually were in charge of our children's education, such as, you know, we have some strong teachers assistants out there. They know classroom management. They have operated, they've seen many, many different teaching styles. I'd like to see them be incorporated and become teachers without having to get a 4-year degree. I'd like to see where we take alternate routes to develop strong teachers that look like us, and teachers that don't have to go out here and get a $100,000 student loan in order to make that happen. I'd like to see where we create all kinds of pipelines for people to want to go into the education field. Because I'm a guest lecturer at UNC Charlotte. I teach in a class with Dr. Susan Harden, and we talk about it all the time, how people are not going into teaching anymore because they don't want to be kicked around and they don't want to be underpaid. So, but there are people who, if we made a situation where it was actually admirable again to work at a school, and it actually meant something to be an educator, then we would have our leaders and we would have our teachers. And I will tell you, so my great grandmother, Caroline Peary, she was a teacher. And she helped to build one-room schoolhouses in the rural South in Mississippi and Alabama, I believe it was. And one of the things that I never understood was, like, I could call her and be like, "Grandma, I won $1 million." And she'd be like, "Oh, that's great, dear." But when I called her to tell her that I got my associate's degree, you know, the joy, the pride around that. And I never really quite understood it, but I do understand it now, that there was a time when we as a people understood that education was our key to freedom and liberty. And there are other people who understand that too. And that's why we're getting blocked out left and right. Yeah. So my vision is that we can have education and educators and leaders who are unimpeded in teaching Black children and brown children and poor children, so that we can all have a stake in this great American divine, so to speak. I think that this community schools model is a small step towards that. It creates a strong foundation for what we all want. It creates a space where, as a community, the things that we've been really desperate for get addressed. That's what I really want. I don't, it breaks my heart to see people go to the school board and they're so upset about what's taking place in schools. And, this is a solution to that. This is a solution to my own anger that I experienced. And so I'm hoping that we just really rally around this model and rally around the community to support it, because it's important and it's going to make a big impact for us. And there's somebody who said they have a question. Joanne Stevens, did her question get answered? She said she has a question for the presenter.
Yeah, that was Aisha's question.
Oh, okay.
I believe. Now, Miss Joanne, she may have her own question, so.
I think Samantha asked on her behalf earlier on
Okay.
that specific question.
Okay. All right. So again, anybody that's on the call, again, thank you for staying with us for almost an hour and a half. If anybody else has a question, you can type it into the chat or into the Q&A because I'll see it if you put it in the chat. I'd also like to thank everybody that did attend. Hopefully you found this informative. Hopefully it opened your eyes to new possibilities and the ability for us to take and dictate where we go with our educational process. It's very important to me to stress, as a former executive within a major corporation who always said, we donate money to the communities that surround where we work. And I think we need to do that. We need to call upon those businesses that are here in and around these communities to say, if you want better communities to partake of your goods and services, then let's teach them. And that you've got skin in the game. You're here, you need to invest into your community. I'm looking around, I don't see any more questions. Again, I want to thank Shemaya for taking all the time to put this presentation together. I know that it is a part of her heart, but it still takes effort and it still takes time. I want to thank the team for pulling together and creating this event tonight, and also want to lead into the next event. The next event will be Monday, May 22nd, and this will be an in-person. It will probably be streamed also, but we want you to come out and talk to us. We're going to have more members. I do want to acknowledge that we had several members from CMS and a school board member that were in attendance. We also want the community to be there. We want teachers to be there. We want parents to be there. And we also want to hear from the kids because they're the ones that are going to benefit from this program. So we want this to be a community-wide event to go over what we just discussed today and to get their input as to what they want to see out of the community school model. It's on Monday, May 22nd. You will, as a registrant, get another copy of the invitation to this. And please share this with your community, share this with your contacts, share this with those that you care for and want to see us build the community we want. If there's anyone else, Claude, do you have any closing comments, or are we all good to go?
No, we're all good to go. I enjoyed the comments as well. I do apologize for being off screen, but I am struggling with these allergies and I didn't want that to interfere with this lovely and wonderful presentation. Thank you, Shemaya. I think that you really brought a lot of insight into what it means to be or what community schools are and is, and how it can impact or positively affect current education system that we are and our children are going under now. So I really thank you for that clarity and appreciate your time that you shared. And thank you again for the team as well.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Joanne?
Yes, I'd like to say thank you to you, Shemaya, for presenting something that did not have the shame or blame that usually goes along with change in systems. I appreciate the gracefulness that you use to navigate our participants and our observers tonight, our guests, through the opportunity that community schools bring. You shed good light. This real high moment was when you described how people from all different walks of life are struggling with trust within the school systems now. And I'd like to thank the team that we have here with education, that which Chimay is a part of, that we are trying to take this with, we're taking the high ground with this. And it's so easy, I think, to get sucked into the politics of education rather than the principle of a fair and equitable school system. So I thank you for what you brought to our community tonight. I'm deeply grateful for that.
All right. Thanks again, everybody. One last closing thought. It used to be a death sentence in the United States, particularly in the South, to teach a person of lower means. If you taught a slave, you could be killed. I think we need to keep that in mind. Education is what frees us from the bonds that bind us and allow us to fully understand and appreciate where we can go. Don't ignore that, cherish it, and grow that. With that, I close. Everybody have a great evening. Look good to see the team. We'll have a closing discussion soon. And if those that wish, we'll send the slides to you later. Have a good evening, everybody.